Greetings from Costa Rica, and thank you very much for joining me tonight. My name is Matt Rosensteel. I'm the owner-broker of Latitude 10 Costa Rica Realty, broadcasting live from Playa Junquial, Guanacaste, Costa Rica. As always, on Wednesday nights at 7 p.m. Costa Rica time, 9 p.m. Eastern, we're here with our live Costa Rica chats with Costa Rica Matt. Tonight, as always, because this is the last broadcast of the month of April, we're going to go over some questions we've gotten from viewers over the past month. If you're watching now and you wish you would have got your question in before this episode, don't hesitate to post it in the comments of this video, and we'll be more than happy to try and answer it at the end of our May sequence and go over the question then. Tonight, we're going to cover a wide variety of topics, starting first and foremost with some April news from Costa Rica, especially regarding Semana Santa and the presidential election, which wrapped up very early in the month here. Next, we're going to go over a question someone had about budgets and the cost of living here in Costa Rica. We'll touch on baseball. We'll touch on music. We'll also touch on whether or not it's worth working here in Costa Rica. And finally, we've got some news that me and my family are headed down to a very special retreat hosted by Elena, a fellow YouTuber who's had a big impact on the Costa Rica relocation effort. Again, this is our Wednesday night live Costa Rica chat. This is Costa Rica Matt. Without further delay, I'd like to say, again, thanks for joining me. Let's get started and stay tuned. Good evening again. It's April 2022, and as I customarily do at the end of the month, I ensure that I wrap up my live Costa Rica chats by answering questions submitted by you, my beloved viewers, over the previous month. Tonight, we want to first touch on what's happening in April. Next, we're going to go over some questions that you submitted, from budgets and the cost of living through baseball to working here in Costa Rica. I'm also going to make a very bold prediction that I hope won't seem too bold later in 23. But for the moment, let's start talking about what happened here in April 2022 in Costa Rica. And I can see that we've got some lovely music we just discovered in our streaming service in the background here. Thank you very much, Steve and Sean, for joining me. I love your question, Sean, based on my previous text messages. First and foremost, let's cover some of the most important news events of April 2022. Earlier in the month, Costa Rica went through the annual tradition of Semana Santa, or Easter week, here in Costa Rica. This is an incredibly big deal for the country because they've had traditionally very strong Catholic roots. In fact, the country is one of Central America's, republics that were set up by Spain, absolutely had that strong Catholic tradition and still does today. In Costa Rica, Semana Santa means one of the biggest vacation weeks of the year. Culminating with Easter Sunday, you see people generally take the entire week off if they have the opportunity. At least they'll be taking that Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday off. And what happens here in the country is that because a huge percentage of the population lives in the densely populated Central Valley, during Semana Santa, almost everybody from that urban, densely populated area comes out to Guanacaste, where we have beautiful beaches and some of the best places for people to vacation. In many ways, it's just like spring break in the US. I remember growing up in Indiana and driving down to Florida, packed on the highways with tons of people and really competing to get down to those nice beaches. It's absolutely the same here in Guanacaste, where on the first days of Semana Santa, you will see enormous traffic jams on the highways leading out to Guanacaste. Now, Semana Santa again culminated with Easter Sunday, which at this point I can't exactly remember which day it was, but you see people spending the entire day at the beach. You see families reuniting here in Guanacaste, and really you see that it's a more important holiday than what you typically see in the U.S. or Canada, in that almost 100% of the country is not working. They're focused on absolutely taking that vacation. And for example, if you're in the Costa Rica real estate world and trying to get business done during Semana Santa or Easter week, generally speaking, you aren't going to get anything accomplished because lawyers, bankers, everybody is taking time off and you won't get anything accomplished. So we got through Semana Santa, and definitely it was always a big week out here on the coast, where we sort of huddle down and wait for the visitors to come and go. And somewhat, many of us who actually live out here in the beaches try to avoid all of the traffic and the madness that happens along the coast. Unfortunately, it's a time of year that you also see some of the big problems come out of the woodwork, where people aren't safe at the beaches. They're drinking all day and having a great time with their families. And very often you can find that Semana Santa or Christmas week would be a time of the year that you see beaches claim their victims. And yes, this year we did have unfortunate, absolutely tragic news from one of our local beaches, where, yes, a visitor from the Central Valley was ripped out to sea and couldn't make it back, and ended up another statistic, which unfortunately is something that we see almost every Semana Santa or Easter week. So anyhow, we got through it. That's what happened and what you frequently see. More importantly, I want to touch on the presidential election in Costa Rica that wrapped up in early April with the second round of voting on the presidential candidate. If you've watched my vlog before, you remember that we were running off the election between two candidates, Jose Maria Figueres and Rodrigo Alberto de Jesus Chavez Robles, or as you know him, most people know him locally, Rodrigo Chavez. Figueres was the institutional, absolutely historically massive candidate, in that his party, the Partido Liberación Nacional, is a party that's run the country essentially for 40 or 50 years, since the 1948 Civil War. Rodrigo Chavez of the Partido Progreso Social Democrático was definitely somebody that was not nearly as institutionalized, not as big of a name, and he ended up carrying the day in the second runoff, or rather the second presidential election, where here in Costa Rica, of course, we have a multi-party system. They had 8 or 9 candidates who ran for president in the first round, and if none of those candidates win 40% or more of the general vote in the first round, then it goes to a runoff between the top 2 candidates. As I mentioned, Jose Maria Figueres of Partido Liberación Nacional, PLN, or just Liberación, as many people call it here, had a very uphill struggle after that first round because, frankly, there are a lot of people who dislike that party. And in fact, Rodrigo Chavez didn't necessarily have to really run on his own platform or achieve that popularity. He also got a lot of votes because after the first presidential election, or rather that first round of voting, we were down to just two candidates, and between the two candidates, there were, less than 40% of the electorate who voted for Liberación, and the vast majority of the regular population, everybody else, that had voted for somebody else in the initial presidential election. We can imagine it's hard if, 1 in 7 people have originally voted for Figueres, for him to then convince more than half the electorate that he was the right choice. And Chavez did take the election by actually what turned out to be a smaller margin than some people expected. He's definitely a bit more to the right and conservative than Figueres and Liberación. But again, as I've frequently emphasized here, in this multi-party system where you get so many voices competing against each other, you find that it's difficult to see a government move strongly in one direction or another, and that really all of those competing interests make it hard for the government to take strong moves to one side of the political spectrum or another. Rodrigo Chavez had been at the International Monetary Fund when he had some interesting allegations arise regarding the treatment of women within the place that he was working. Figueres also had, to say the least, a checkered past involving money that ended up in his account and a trip to Switzerland that was unexpected. But anyhow, we've got Rodrigo Chavez as the future president of Costa Rica. He takes over, I believe, on either May 7th or 8th. And, some of the things he's talked about in his political platform include lowering the price of some of the canasta básica goods. In Costa Rica, to explain that term, canasta básica, they have a list of the basic goods that a family needs to survive. In English, that would sort of be like the basic basket. And the Costa Rica government sets prices for everything in the canasta básica. So they have very controlled pricing for things like rice, beans, vegetables, on and on. And Rodrigo Chavez has promised to try and lower the price of rice. Interestingly, Rodrigo, the president-elect, has a doctorate in economics from Ohio State University, which is pretty close to home for me, being from Indiana. And I was interested to read on Wikipedia about 5 minutes ago while I was preparing for this. So that's what's happening in April 2022 in Costa Rica. A couple important items there. Let's get to questions submitted by viewers over the past month. And again, if you have your own question, feel free to post it here in the chat, and I will try to respond tonight or get to it in the last episode of May on our Wednesday night Costa Rica chats. First of all, I had a question about budgets in Costa Rica. One person asked, can you live on $1,000 per month comfortably? That is an absolutely relative question, or rather, it's easy to say that yes, on $1,000 a month, there are many people who could live very comfortably in Costa Rica. In fact, the majority of Costa Ricans and households here in the country are making do with $1,000 or less per month. As an expat moving to Costa Rica, it is absolutely possible to live comfortably, on $1,000 or less per month. But you need to be prepared that the lifestyle you have here will have to fit that budget in some important ways. Many people want to move to Guanacaste and keep some of the luxuries that they had back in the US or Canada. And if you want to come down here and live on less than $1,000 a month, honestly, you are going to have a pretty simple lifestyle. First of all, you probably would not be able to afford to maintain and drive your own car on that budget. I would say that your housing is going to be very basic. If you're renting and including that number within the 1,000, you're going to have to find a very simple home, and you're going to have to eat simply as well, which is, again, entirely possible. If you love rice, beans, and vegetables and a little bit of protein as every single meal of your day, of course, you can have a microscopic budget for groceries every month and make your overall picture of $1,000 work. In fact, one of the guys that I've had on my channel a couple times, Jerry V. Hall, one of my favorite people on earth, is a person who's living on some incredible number a month. I think it's even under $500 that he spends per month. Now, he lives in a very simple apartment. He is extremely careful with his money when it comes to food. And I can pretty much guarantee you that he's not driving around an SUV to get around town. Jerry, you can correct me if I'm wrong on that. He's focused on his budget. The long story short is that if you move to Costa Rica and your goal is to maintain a similar standard of living as you have in the US or Canada, I'm sorry to say that $1,000 and probably even $2,000 a month is not going to cut it. Here, for example, while you've all been complaining about gas prices in the US, we've been accustomed to seeing $4 or $5 per gallon as the price of gas in Costa Rica for almost as long as I can remember. The government here heavily taxes gas, and that's going to be one significant expense if you want to move here and continue to work, to drive around. Second of all, if you want to eat food like you eat in the US or Canada, that's also going to be a pretty large expense because most of the processed luxury foods that you want from the US or Canada, they're imported, taxed, and they are expensive on the supermarket shelves here. Boxes of cereals can be $6 or $7. You see all kinds of American food products here that are what one would consider very high priced. And again, if you want to move here and switch to the local diet, that's rice and beans as a staple with produce as the items that you're adding to that rice and beans. Yes, you can eat very cheaply. Unfortunately, though, if you want to sit down to a nice meal every evening where you've got a variety of food, really nice portion of protein, and if you want to accompany that with some of those, imported food products that you see from the US or Canada, it's going to cost you a lot. I was tracking our monthly expenses years and years ago, and we were struggling to stay under $300 or $400 per month as our grocery budget. Now, at that point, we were not at all trying to adhere to that rice, beans, and produce mentality. We were eating pretty much what we wanted to. Honestly, I don't keep track of our expenses now when it comes to groceries, but I can guarantee you that you could easily spend almost $1,000 a month just feeding your family if you move here and you want to continue having that breakfast, lunch, and dinner that you've grown accustomed to that can be extremely cheap in a US grocery store. So the long story short here is that, yes, if you want to move to Costa Rica and live a lifestyle that is similar to the locals, If you want to use public transportation, eat very simple food, and live in a simple place, you can live on $1,000 a month, maybe $1,500 a month for a couple, or even $2,000 for a family. But if your ideal is that we're going to move to Costa Rica and still have the same standard of living and the same luxuries that we're used to, I would actually plan on your monthly expenses when it comes to gas, groceries, and rent. Take that third one back. Gas and groceries, your budget is actually going to go up if you want to come down here and live the same way that you live in the US. So don't fantasize about moving to Central America and suddenly being able to pay a nickel for that, steak dinner and movie theater and the full package we used to hear about from our grandparents. Don't imagine that it's going to be significantly cheaper to live here just because this is Central America. Think that it's going to be cheaper to live here if you also adjust your lifestyle to what it means to live similarly to a Costa Rican. Another thing I wanted to mention, where you can expect to save significant amounts of money here. First of all, property taxes is one of the biggest areas. If you own a home that is not a luxury home by Costa Rica standards, and if it's fee simple titled property, which is everything back from the beach, your property taxes here are only 1/4% of the tax assessed value. If you purchase that property, then immediately your tax assessed value for the property is going to be your purchase price. But still, you can find, for example, a very decent 2 or 3 bedroom home for $300,000 maximum, in some areas here. You can pay way more than that for a nice gated community, on and on. But let's imagine with a $300,000 comfortable home here, you're paying, again, 1/4% of your taxes. $300,000, doing the math, you'd be paying $750 a year in property taxes. That can be one area where you save incredibly well. A second can be a lot of the personnel, the staff that you hire. If you want, for example, to have somebody clean out your home for you, or you need a nanny, or if you need somebody to come by and maintain your garden or do pool maintenance, those sorts of services here in Costa Rica can be extremely cheaper than you'd find in the US or Canada. And it's one of the areas where you can expect to pay a whole heck of a lot less to live in Costa Rica than the US or Canada. But beyond that, and your property taxes, for most day-to-day expenses, you have to be prepared to pay about the same or more that you would pay in the US. So again, don't fantasize that this is a place to move and suddenly find that everything is just extremely cheap, because that's simply not the truth. Next, we had a question about baseball, and I'm really glad somebody brought it up, just because I haven't thought about sports or talking about them on my channel ever. Unfortunately, the person who asked this question was looking for where there are leagues, where you can find good, private lessons for their kids. Baseball in Costa Rica is, it's about as popular as, let's say, badminton in the US or squash. I am sure that there are people playing baseball somewhere in Costa Rica right now, but 99.9% of anybody who's playing a sport in the country right now is playing soccer. Really, there is no popularity for baseball here. I've never seen a league, whether it be kids or minor or professional leagues, and it would be almost impossible to give you an idea of where you could move in Costa Rica and play baseball. Funny enough, Just to the north of us in Nicaragua, it's entirely the opposite. Baseball is an incredibly important sport. You find leagues at every level, but here, really, it is soccer, and soccer as the top three most popular sports. Mountain biking or any kind of cycling is probably the second most popular sport. Then you have some other people who do different things here and there, but really, unfortunately, you won't find baseball. You won't find North American football, as they call it here. And the main sport is above and beyond soccer, football, as they call it here. Unfortunately, you won't be able to find baseball almost whatsoever. Next, we had a question posted about working in Costa Rica. An expat wanted to know if it's worth working here or if salaries are too low. And this is a very great question because I do meet a lot of people who figure, well, I have skills that are transferable to Costa Rica. I bet that I could be a better mechanic, a better welder, a better roofer, on and on in Costa Rica than the competition is. And that might be entirely possible. You could find that, correct, Thomas, there are no hockey leagues. Going back to professions here, you could absolutely move to Costa Rica and find that your skills as a licensed plumber in the US put you far above and beyond what the typical plumber is here in Costa Rica. Unfortunately, though, the salaries are very much lower than what you would want to see in the US or Canada. And unless you want to try and compete with those sorts of salaries, it's really not worth trying to come here and just become a working individual in your typical field. As a side note, you're not legally allowed to work here until you have either permanent residency or your citizenship. So yes, you can move down here. You're allowed to start a company. And as an investor, you're allowed to run that company and actually have it providing services. But legally, you should not be the one who's actually working for that company, providing the services and collecting a salary. So that's one point to make. And second of all, yes, you will see that Costa Ricans will do jobs for maybe 20 to 30% of what it would cost you to hire someone in the US for that same job. I'm thinking, for example, let's go with electricians. I have terrible stories about Costa Rican electricians that, yeah, there's no trade school that is really well regulated here. There are codes that most electricians probably don't understand and never have followed. And there's plenty of just plain old junk work done by electricians here. You might see that and say, well, I could do that absolutely perfect electrical job and totally destroy the competition. Well, unfortunately, the price at which you have to do that job for somebody else is going to be so low compared to what a union electrician makes in the US that I'm certain you wouldn't be enthused about coming down here. You don't see a lot of US citizens immigrating down to Mexico looking for work. You see the reverse because the wages are higher in the US. It's absolutely the same here in Costa Rica. Not to the same degree, but absolutely you're going to be competing with people, for example, who are willing to do a simple electrical job for 100, very small wages. It's hard to put any specific number on it, but we can get somebody. In fact, our absolute best appliance repairman will charge about $100 to drive an hour to and from our house because he comes from Liberia. He'll fix a problem no matter what it takes. I've seen him welding spare parts onto our fridge. I've seen him doing all sorts of day-long crazy repairs. And at about $120 per repair, he's one of the most expensive technicians we hire. And sometimes he's getting $100 or $120 for what turns out to be 4 or 5 hours of solid work, trips to the hardware store and back. And I can't even imagine what the bill would be if I asked a US electrician to do this. This particular appliance repair guy, again, is among the most expensive options that we could probably find somebody to do some of the simpler repairs even less than that. So if you're wondering, should I move to Costa Rica and take my skills down there, you're more than welcome and we'd love to have you, but you do need to be prepared to compete with much lower wages. So thank you very much for that question. Next, somebody asked what kind of music is popular in Costa Rica. And it's tough for me to answer this question because I don't think I've been in a, what's a music venue called? A disco? I haven't been somewhere listening to popular music in probably 10 years. Or, I've been to certain fiestas and festivals and different things. So I'm definitely not the cultural expert that one may think I am when it comes to music. But I did want to touch on specifically Guanacaste and the types of music that you find here that used to define what it was to go to a dance and really shake your thing. Shake your thing. I don't know where I'm going with this. There are, in Guanacaste, if we were going out to a dance, there are 3 kinds of music that you need to understand and really be attuned to figure out how to fit in and dance with other people. And those 3 types are cumbia, salsa, and merengue. Those 3 would be really the styles you saw at dances in Guanacaste that you still continue to see early in the evening. And I say that specifically because when you go to fiestas, oftentimes you will see that early in the evening, they're playing more traditional music, stuff that appeals to a wider range of listeners, and definitely stuff that gets people dancing. Cumbia here in Costa Rica, you'll hear it's very easy to identify the style of cumbia that they like to play at dances. It's defined by a bass line that goes do 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 do. That's cumbia in a nutshell. You also hear the güiro, the instrument that people scrape that goes. That's cumbia. You also get sort of a heavier sound with that shh, 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 when you're listening to what's called swing here in Guanacaste. Next, there's salsa music, which I can't begin to sing the bass line from that, but you would recognize it from Cuba and other parts of Latin America with a much, much more syncopated rhythm. You can think of salsa artist Ricky Martin, might have had some salsa hits, but definitely a syncopated bass line, which means that it's not as straightforward. It would sound more like boom, 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 just as a quick overview of salsa. And finally, merengue, the 3rd type of music that you would hear here in dances in Costa Rica, again, early in the evening, would definitely be a straightforward that's one merengue song I can think of, but there's a very back and forth motion to the dance. It's super easy. And as of 5-10 years ago, those are the only types of music you would hear at a dance. Now, as the music and the evening goes on, you hear a lot of reggaeton, which would be doof, ka-doo, da, doof, ka-doo, da, doof, ba-doo, ba, boof. And all kinds of more heavy, sort of dance music that really is just intended to help people grind on each other. So again, those three types of music that I always love to hear at Costa Rican dances are cumbia, salsa, and merengue. Now that I've done a little bit of embarrassing myself and sung live on my channel, I sort of just wrote down music and then didn't think about how I was going to explain that. I do want to touch on a couple of questions we've had in our comments here. First of all, one of my favorite questions from Sean Patrick: where can you find good Indian food in Costa Rica? And this is particularly relevant because just this afternoon I was eating with my gorgeous wife at Masala, an Indian restaurant just outside of Playa Brasilito. Sean recommended this restaurant to me, and above and beyond all else, whether you're looking for great Indian food or just international food in general, having food at Masala outside of Brasilito today made us realize just how far the culinary scene in Guanacaste is coming. And this was absolutely magnificent Indian food that tasted, there were flavors in there that we couldn't even describe. It was hot, fresh, really, really well done food. It was relatively inexpensive. The restaurant is based they took over an old pizza parlor just outside of Brasilito. And it's something that you would have never seen here 10 years ago. When I moved in 2008, we didn't have any one of 1,000 options that you find here now. And for us to be able to go 45 minutes from our house, we live sort of in a southern rural area, but for us to have access to that kind of food is incredible. We would have never imagined it would be available when we first moved here and we were struggling to find decent pizza or a decent burger. Really, what struck us also was that the folks at Masala, which I'm going to keep plugging, if you haven't eaten there, you really should. These are, they asked us to speak in English because they are real transplants from India. The food is authentic, and it's apparent that whereas you would previously see people immigrating only to the US or Canada to open up this kind of restaurant, they're in Costa Rica opening up a real family-run Indian restaurant that's absolutely spectacular. And not just to plug their restaurant, but more than anything to plug the food available now in Guanacaste. It was really surprising that we have such amazing Asian food here in the area. I also saw a comment from Miles here: Costa Rica too dangerous, stay in the States. I will be touching on security in next week's live chat. We'll be back on Wednesday night at 7 p.m. Costa Rica time here, as we are almost every Wednesday night. And that's specifically the topic I want to address. Definitely, there are security concerns from expats moving here. And if you've never been here, if you don't really know what's happening, if you've got a completely biased perspective because you're just judging on the news that you see and, sort of a peripheral vision, absolutely, you might get the impression that Costa Rica is dangerous. But as someone who's lived here now 14 years, now in a home that really has no locks on the doors, that has no security measures other than the common sense that we use and the dog that we have outside our door, I can tell you that Costa Rica is an extremely safe place to live if you play your cards right. And next week on Wednesday night at 7 p.m., I'm going to give my practical overview to how you can stay safe in Costa Rica and not become the victim of some of the crimes that might have blown your perception out of proportion when it comes to the security here in Costa Rica. Absolutely, Coin Bros, I 100% agree. The food in general can be considered okay here. But yes, there are some great places who make absolutely exceptional food. And again, Masala, just outside of Brasilito, is really one of those places. Want to go back through here and look, get around the very end of it. Absolutely. Mark brought up a great comment here about the underdeveloped infrastructure. Yes, Costa Rica is beautiful. We have the world's best beaches. They're all public, and they limit the development right on those beaches. But if you're looking for a place with 8-lane superhighways connecting every single town with a McDonald's at every single interstate exit, unfortunately, Costa Rica might not be the perfect place for you and your family. There is weak infrastructure here when you're looking to get to some of the quieter beach communities and not necessarily go between the absolute major cities. We had another question. Steve asked, can an expat start a business in Costa Rica without being a resident? And Steve, absolutely you can. Excuse me. That's the masala coming up there. Costa Rica even encourages foreigners to move here and invest and start up their own business. I'm not a lawyer, so I can't really give the nuance, but essentially, whereas you're legally allowed to start your business and be an investor, create a money-making enterprise, you're not supposed to be working for it as a salaried employee. You're not supposed to earn wages in the country until you have your permanent residency. Keep in mind, you can invest, as someone mentioned in the comments, to get your residency here. If you put as little as $60,000 in a Costa Rica bank account as a CD, you can earn temporary residency status under the what in that case would be the pensioner program, or you can purchase property to the amount of $150,000 and you can gain investor status residency. But neither of those allow you the legal opportunity to work in Costa Rica until you gain permanent residency. Now, you can go from one of those programs and spend 3 years as either an investor resident or a pensioner resident, and then you can apply for your permanent residency without a problem. You can obtain it and then work from there on out. But in terms of legally being able to work here, those immediate forms of residency that can come through your investment are not going to be sufficient to give you the legal right to work. You see tons and tons of foreigners come here and start their own business. They work for it. They're the driving force 100%. But legally, that's not what should be happening. And you will see that those people are vulnerable if Johnny Law ever comes knocking on the door and wants to check their status. Chris asked, what do you miss most about the States? That's a terrific question. And in fact, previously, there's obviously my family, and I would love to be close to my parents, my brother-in-law, my nephews. I wish I could be closer to them. And at this point in history, that's pretty much the only thing I really miss about the US, if anything else, really, if I had to put a name on something else that I miss about the United States, it would definitely have to be sort of the more straightforward nature of business and interpersonal relationships that a lot of times in the US you can find it's much easier to navigate the difficulties of setting up a partnership, or you find that in the US the style of communication can be much more straightforward and easier to understand. Here in Costa Rica, it takes a very overly cultured and experienced mindset to understand exactly why a person might be reacting to what you're saying in a particular way. And frankly, having that straightforward ability to sort of dialogue and have other people say exactly how they feel rather than being, sort of passive and not necessarily clear about what they intend to do is probably the only thing I miss about the US aside from my family. Now that we have amazing Asian food here as well, because like I said, about 2 weeks ago, I would have told you that the only thing I really miss about the United States is the access to some of that incredible diverse food from throughout the world that you can't find as much here in Guanacaste. When I started tonight, I mentioned that I was going to make a very bold prediction. And this is an entirely different subject I wanted to bring up. That earlier today, Anne Marie and I were driving around north of us to check out development possibilities and what is happening on the coast north of us. In particular, we were checking out our particular project that is slated to be absolutely massive. If you look at the sales brochure from this community, there are projected to be, I think, close to 200 homes with starting prices above $1 million for the least of the homes. They've got a golf course. They have incredible amenities, all designed into this package. And we said, well, my gosh, this is happening just north of us. We need to go look and see what's actually happening on the ground. We went up and saw where the project will be. I'm going to show you a little video driving around the future project site in just a minute. But first, I'm going to let you know my bold prediction, and that is I was told by the representatives of this project that the infrastructure and amenities will be ready by late 23. That's a year and 7 or 8 months from now. And I want to make a bold prediction, go out on a limb here, that by the end of 2023, at the project that I'm not going to name, that I'm just going to show a little clip from the site for, and I'm going to put this on my calendar, in December 23, we're going to have a live chat with Costa Rica Matt, and we're going to go back up to this site and see what has actually happened. My prediction is you're not going to see a pristine golf course and all of these amenities. You're going to see something that is still very much in the works, if in fact it's actually going forward. And part of the reason I want to bring up this prediction and what we're looking at is just to say that 2 weeks from now, next week we're doing security on my channel. In 2 weeks, we're going to talk about the internet versus reality in Costa Rica. And specifically, I want to help people begin to take what they see online with a grain of salt. And a grain of salt that's, more like a geode of salt, a massive, massive chunk of salt. Because one of the biggest perils to buying real estate here is believing what you see online without verifying it on the ground. And I want to look at this at an individual listing level. We're going to take photos from the web and then look at the actual property itself. And most importantly, I also want to look at developments where they've got an absolutely spectacular presentation as to what will be. They have timelines, they have convincing sales staff, they have all kinds of information that would make you think this is going to be there in 14 months. But truly, you need to learn how to weigh the internet and what you see on it versus reality in the Costa Rica real estate market. Here's a little clip of where we were driving around today. You'll see this is in 14 months projected to be, and I'm sorry for the vertical video here, an absolutely pristine gated community. I would love to be wrong with this and have the community there fully done on the timeline they project. However, I am willing to bet, as Costa Rica Matt, that what you're seeing now is not going to be an absolutely flawless gated community by the end of 2023. Again, I will love to be wrong about that and see someone get a project moving forward that quickly. What I'm saying tonight is it ain't going to happen. I want to talk about this kind of process in Costa Rica, and I want to help people navigate the difference between those projects that are absolutely going to achieve success and have, and some of those projects that are just promising a lot and not necessarily going to get there. I have some spectacular questions in the comments. We'll be answering those in our last live broadcast of May. For right now, I'm just plainly a bit spent. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to all of you tonight. Please subscribe to my channel and do join me for my live chats with Costa Rica Matt every Wednesday night here at 7 p.m. Costa Rica time. Thank you all for joining me. I love you very much. Pura vida.